What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Mind Something. If you're new here, my name is Jake, and in today's video, I've had a few people ask me where I got my rigs, and then I've had other people ask me how I made them. And yes, the answer is I did make them. I didn't purchase them. And because I've gotten so many questions about it, I figured, you know what? Maybe I'll just show you guys how I made these things. Unfortunately, I wasn't making YouTube content at the time that I was making these first few rigs, but luckily I did take lots of pictures. So I wanted to share those pictures with you guys and just kind of walk you through how I made these things. So I've got a little folder here full of all of these pictures, and we'll just kind of go through them one by one here. So this is the very first rig that I built, which I call Naboo. It's the black rig that has 33080s and 33070s. And here I'm just basically, I made a little template to kind of give me an idea of how I wanted to arrange the GPUs and where I wanted to put fans. And we'll just kind of skim through these. So this is with the acrylic on top of it, and I've started cutting holes with a 4-inch hole saw, as you can see. I'm just going to kind of start skimming through these photos here. So here is where I'm basically tracing my cutout holes for each of the GPUs. And you'll notice that I have the acrylic taped onto the wood structure here. That keeps everything in line. And here's a picture of a few of them cut out. Now, as far as cutting these holes out, I just want to give you a heads up. After the first one, I learned it's probably much better to cut the wood out first and then put your acrylic on top of it and trace that outline from behind, and then cut the acrylic separately. If you do that, you can use different tools to cut the acrylic instead of trying to use a skill saw and a jigsaw to cut all of these holes out, which can create some splinters in the acrylic, and you even run the risk of cracking it. So just a few more. So here's with all the holes cut out, and I've started adding the loom, which we'll cover what that is here in just a moment. And here I've got some of the trim pieces on the sides here. And you can see that the holes are all lining up. And yeah, making sure that you cut your acrylic large enough to compensate for you know, some are on top and some are on the inside was a bit tricky on the very first one here. And these are the mounting brackets or little right angle pieces that I use to hold the GPUs up. And on this first rig that I built, all of the GPUs were basically on the outside of the case, and the coolers were blowing the hot air inside of the case. And inside of the case is where I had the motherboard, the power supplies, and all of that good stuff. But as I learned going forward, it's better to have the GPUs on the inside of the case for obvious reasons. But you do have to make the case quite a bit thicker to fit all of that equipment in there. And this one I made very thin. It's only about 7 or 8 inches wide. Here's a picture of the reverse side. And here's a completed picture. As you can see, the GPUs are on the outside. And, you know, definitely not as clean as I wanted it to be for wire management either. And here's some picture of the RGB. And this picture was taken a couple of years ago during Christmas, hence all of the decorations here. Alright, so here's some acrylic. And there's a local place where I live that sells acrylic products. And just wanted you guys to be aware, you don't have to purchase clear acrylic. You can purchase it in a variety of colors, shapes, thicknesses. And here's a few examples. So one thing that really determines the price of how much you're going to spend on acrylic is the thickness. I tried to make sure that I could get all of the pieces cut out of one sheet. In fact, I tried to make sure that I could get 2 rigs out of the same sheet whenever I started building additional ones. For that reason, you probably want to stay under 48 inches tall, but that's going to be tough depending on how many GPUs you put in there. Now this is not acrylic, this is actually ABS plastic, but it is an alternative. You know, if you just want to build some type of wooden rig but you don't want it to look wooden, you could use some ABS plastic like this, and this is much cheaper than acrylic. Now here we have some examples that I was providing to a client that I built a rig for on their different trim options and colors. So we built a white rig for them, and we're just trying to decide on what kind of trim piece or what color trim pieces we were going to use. Now you guys can probably tell this is basically tile molding. Okay, so this is something that you would do around corners in a shower or perhaps a kitchen, but anywhere you've got tile, and you can find this type of trim at your local hardware store like Home Depot or Lowe's, and it's actually not too expensive. I think about an 8-foot or a 10-foot strip of this is about $25. And if you're smart and you build this thing correctly, you can get all of your trim pieces out of one stick. Now here's some white on white, which was kind of an interesting combo. And eventually we decided on black on white. The gold on white looked pretty good as well. There's another example of what that trim looks like. And there's the black. I like the contrast, especially with the Founders Editions graphics cards in there. So here's the second rig that I built, and this one was for a client. This was for 630-90s. And as you can tell, it is quite a bit thicker than the previous one. And this is just me laying out the acrylic pieces and making sure that my measurements are correct. Now when you cut this stuff, just FYI, this makes a huge mess. So be prepared to be wiping this stuff out of every crevice of your face if you're not wearing any kind of eye protection. It's very dangerous. And again, here's the tracing of the GPU openings. And for anybody curious about the car in the background, this is Scion FRS, and the engine that you saw in the background, that's an LS1 out of a Camaro with the T56 transmission. So again, using a 4-inch hole saw to cut these out. Take your time with that. You know, it's going to require a drill that has a lot of torque. So just FYI, the faster you go through this, obviously it'll get through it, but you have to stop and kind of clean out the teeth of the saw because it gets gummed up with all of that plastic or the acrylic in there. And whenever you start and stop, you might have a hole saw like mine that likes to shoot off, and you got to be careful that it doesn't shoot off and scratch the acrylic. So here I've gone and used a smaller hole saw to cut out all of my rounded corners for where the GPU openings is going to be. Also makes it a lot easier to get your skill saw in there and cut out your holes. Now when it comes to assembling these things, I do recommend countersinking your screw heads. Obviously you don't want anything poking through and scratching the acrylic from behind. And this one in particular I think is right at 48 inches tall, which was pretty tough trying to accommodate 630-90s stacked vertically like this. You want enough space in between the GPUs so that you can have a platform to mount your risers to, and that's tough when you've got a large connector coming out of the top of it trying to hit it. So You know, the taller you go, the more space you can put between these, and obviously you don't have to worry about the heat from the bottom one coming up to the top one if you put a wide enough platform in here to kind of manage that heat and allow the cool air to come in one side and blow the hot air out the other side. So here's with some loom around it and just test fitting some of the 3090s in here. And here's with the trim pieces on and the acrylic. Now you'll notice that the acrylic still has the paper, the protective coating on it. You want to leave that on as long as you possibly can. That would be close to the last step, in my opinion, is peeling that off. Now measuring out the loom here is pretty easy. Essentially what I did is I just spread the loom, wrapped it around, and then cut excess. You know, I gave myself about 1 inch to half an inch longer, and then pushed it all up in place and then cut it to be perfect with a razor blade. So here's getting close to a finished product, and again this one's the 3090 rig. As you can see, we've got the fans mounted on one side here. And this is with fans mounted on both sides with no GPUs. And one thing that I changed about this second one was putting fans up here at the top. I knew that thermal management was going to be a priority with 3090s, and I think the reason I didn't do it on the first one is because the fans that I purchased, they come in packs of 5. And in order to put 12 in here, I had to purchase 3 of those 5 packs, and I was left with 3 extra fans. So I do recommend having some at the top, because we all know heat is going to rise and you want to exhaust that heat at the top as much as you can. Otherwise your top card is probably going to get the hottest. Sorry, there's a lot of pictures of this one apparently. Alright, so here's with the door mounted on the rear, and of course we've got the motherboard mounted as well. And just a heads up, you know, wood is not going to conduct electricity. However, just to be on the safe side, I do recommend that you put some type of rubber washer in between the motherboard and the wood, just as a precautionary measure. I think what I used was probably a 1/4 inch spacer. That should give you enough room to make sure that none of the solder on the back side of the circuit board is touching anything. Now, as far as these wires coming out of the fans are concerned, the fans that I use, they come with a hub and a proprietary plug, and you only have so much cable on these. So just one thing to be cautious of if you're going to build something like this for yourself: the taller you go with this case, the further away the top fan is going to be from the hub, which will probably be located somewhere in the center. And if this cable isn't long enough to reach that, you're going to have some real problems. And here's the little platforms that I made to hold the risers. And there's test fitting a 3090 in there, as well as a couple of power supplies. And that's also something you want to be cognizant of, is where you're mounting your power supplies. You want to make sure that the length of your cables are going to reach all of the GPUs. And I think in this case, this one probably would have been better served down at the bottom. But again, you know, this is the second one I built and kind of a learning curve for me. I had some stickers printed up with the logo, and I wanted to make a lot of these. When I first started making these, obviously GPU mining was a lot more popular, and one of my favorite features about these rigs was the model numbers that I was going to put on them. In this case, it was a 3090.FE6, and if I would have made more, then obviously the model number changes depending on which GPU you're putting in there. And since this one had 63090s, it was more than 2 power supplies needed. We got 3 of them total here. So this is Velcro strapping. Just cut to fit whatever size you need, screwed directly to the back door here. Make sure that you use screws that are shallow enough not to penetrate the outside of the door. And this is me packing it up, getting ready to ship it off to that customer. And here's the latest one that I built. This one is, I think, Alderaan, which is 6 3070 Ti's. So again, we went with white acrylic on this one. Here's cutting out all of the holes again. And each one of these that I built, I've learned a little bit extra, and it makes the process go a little bit more streamlined. But just a heads up, you know, this this is a significant amount of labor that goes into making these. I do have access to a CNC machine, and I do plan on building more of these in the future and utilizing the CNC. But until, you know, the bear market is over and there's a demand for these, I probably won't be looking into it anytime in the near future. Anyways, I think you guys have seen this particular rig in action and completed probably several times on the channel. So we're just going to kind of skim through these photos real quick. I think some people have commented that they look like speakers, and full disclosure that, you know, I'm in the AV industry and I've been around audio stuff my entire life, so no surprise that they turned out looking that way. Lots of pictures. As you guys can't tell, I'm a little bit obsessed with GPU mining. Alright, so here's the 3070 Ti rig completed. And just a few pictures with the RGB on. Now, one thing to note about these RGB fans, the hub can power 10 fans total, but since I have 12, I am using 2 different hubs, and also for wire management purposes, that makes things a lot easier. Otherwise, the hub would be hanging out right in the middle and really getting in the way of all the PCIe cables and power cables. Also, one other thing to note, and you may want to get larger or longer USB cables when building something like this. The standard 24-inch USB cables that come with the riser packs is enough if you stick within the 48-inch dimensions as far as height is concerned. However, it makes it extremely difficult to open this door without having to unplug either the top or the bottom riser. So I recommend getting larger or longer cables if you can. Really dig the purple too. I don't know what it is, but that color and red really seem to set it off. HiveOS, this picture was taken specifically for you. I think we're getting close to the end of all of the pictures here, but before we go, I will show you a couple of different places to purchase the loom that I used for all of the black trim here. Alright, so as far as the loom is concerned, you can purchase this just about anywhere. I'm going to leave a link to this stuff on Amazon. For the inside pieces, I used, I think, 3/8 inch. And then for the fans, I think I might have used something a little less thick. I can't remember. But as long as you get 1/2 inch to 3/8, you should be able to wrap that around up to 3/4 inch MDF or plywood, as well as the 1/4 inch thickness of the acrylic. But here's an example of it. I think there's 25 feet here, 3/8 inch wide, and essentially it's already split for you. You just need to open it up and push it in around all of those corners. And as far as the trim pieces are concerned, I would just recommend going to your local hardware store and finding what you like. And the stuff is pretty resilient. It comes in a variety of colors. But as far as lengths are concerned, I think most of them are going to be about 98 inches long. And then also something to consider when you're cutting these at an angle. Imagine a frame cutting one piece at 45 degrees and the other piece at 45 degrees. You want to make sure that you get something that's conducive to lining up at 45-degree angles so that you don't see any imperfections where the joints meet one another. Anyway, so that's how I built my mining rigs, guys. If you got any questions, do me a favor, leave your comments down below. I'd love to answer them, and I hope you enjoyed the content. That being said, I'm out.